go ahead. All right. So what did y'all talk about in y'all breakout rooms?
Uh, Giovanni and I, we both like individually came to the like conclusion that like this reminded us of like the Ten Commandments. So I thought that was really interesting.
Okay. Definitely has a religious connotation to it. Absolutely. Anybody else? There's 4 points of conversation on the table. You could discuss any of them, or just something interesting that was brought up in the breakout rooms.
When we went over it in our breakout room, uh, we kind of discussed how in the beginning it's more of he's addressing the person directly, like this what you do, this what you don't do. And as it continues to go on, it begins to speak of things more in a spiritual context. You shouldn't do this because God, and you shouldn't act this way because God has your back when you do these things and when he doesn't. And it started off as simple commandments and then became something more spiritual.
Yeah, good observation. That's a really good point. Somebody else, please. Bianca, why don't you put what you wrote in the chat? Why don't you say that out loud to everybody? This is a good point.
Like they aren't violent and they value like friendships and a lot of like people they love.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The value of friendship. That's a really good point that I'm going to touch on later. Nick, I'm going to ask you to do the same thing. What you put in the chat, please say that out loud because it kind of echoes what Bianca was saying. It's a really good point.
I said the text shows how the society valued respect within relationships highly.
Respect within relationships. I'm going to really touch on that a lot throughout my notes also. So keep those 2 things in the back of your mind. So let me ask somebody this. The 4th discussion point. What is your favorite attribute or characteristic about yourself? Let's talk about that. Somebody care to share?
I heard a couple. Mine was that I feel driven. I'm not demoralized very often.
Okay. There's a tenacity to the way that you approach life. You're very driven. I like that. That would definitely take you far. Somebody else.
For me, I find myself being very naturally, like intellectually curious about random shit. So yeah.
So that will take you far in this class. Yeah, intellectual curiosity is a very important attribute, especially in academic spaces, right? Let's get one more, and we'll move on.
Just like he said, like, I thought I knew like a lot of the stuff that they was talking about in the book, but then just reading so much more, you realize that you can learn so much more from every type of text that there is. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah. There's an African proverb that says the wise man knows he knows nothing, right? So like the more that you realize that you don't know, you're more open to learning more things. So that's a great point. And then Maxwell, why don't you go ahead and state what you put in the chat, if you don't mind.
I was saying that I think I'm very ambitious and I try to do better. The day I did before, the year I did before, I try to always push myself a little harder.
Yeah, it's dope. Let's hear from some of the women in the class. What are some of your greatest attributes or characteristics? Y'all trying to be humble? It's all right. You can talk some shit about yourself.
I'm nice.
Okay. What else, Bianca? You got to give me more than nice. That's like me saying I'm black. Like, yeah, I know. What else, Bianca?
Like I'm respectful, like, and I'm really open to other people, like opinions and stuff like that.
Okay. Openness. That's very huge as well. Let me get one more woman, please. Go ahead, Makisha.
I would say being open-minded and being a go-getter. Those are definitely my 2 good characteristics for sure.
So, all right, perfect. I appreciate you guys. So what I'm going to do now is get into my notes for the reading. Hopefully this will help kind of clarify some questions that you guys may have, give you a little bit more context to what we engaged. So the book is literally called The Teachings of Ptahhotep, the oldest book in the world. And then my notes will provide some validity and credibility to that claim. So Ptahhotep, he was 110 years old when he wrote this book. Okay? A lot of the information that I'll be discussing in my notes is found in the preface of the book, which is something to point out. If you're going to read a book, don't do yourself the disservice of just starting at chapter 1. If there's a foreword, read the foreword. If there's a preface, read the preface. There's going to be valuable information in these prefaces and these forewords. There's things called like an annotated bibliography, right? When you do an annotated bibliography, they're going to ask you, what is the theory that this book is operating through? You won't find that, typically you will not find that theory in the first chapter or the last chapter. You'll find that theory in the preface or in the introduction, right? So it becomes very important if you want to do scholarly work to engage the preface. And you'll see why as I start to give you guys some information as it pertains to this reading. So through the preface, I know that Ptahhotep was 110 years old when he produced this writing, okay? At the time, he was in line to become the next pharaoh, right? But he neglected the throne and opted to go down the road of the priesthood, right? So this not only says something about Ptahhotep and his values, right? He values spirituality opposed to power, right? But it also, for me, is generative in understanding how the Kemetic mystery schools work, right? So how schooling and education worked for the ancient Kemetics. There's two things that your schooling would produce. It would produce either a politician or it would produce a priest, right? So yes, so now we go to school, right? Everybody's going to school for jobs, right? But the way that they understood it or overstood it and the way that they situated it is when you come out of this schooling institution, you're going to be positioned to serve the community at one of two capacities, from the space of politics or from the space of spirituality by being a priest. Ptahhotep chose to be a priest, right? The Medr Neter, okay, I'm going to spell that for you. Medr, M-D-W, M as in Mary, D as in David, W as in West. Neter, N as in Nancy, E as in Edward, T as in Tom, C as in California, H as in Harry, E as in Edward, R as in Roger. The Medr Neter, right? This is the world's, along with Africa's, oldest written language system. The world's oldest written language system. And what becomes fecund about this fact is that when archaeologists and researchers discovered the Medr Neter, they did not uncover a developmental period, right? So another way to think about this is when this was produced or when this came to being on Earth, it came complete, right? It didn't start off one way and then evolve. When the people who were discovering and researching ancient Kemet found this Medr Neter, it was a finished product, right? It can be argued, not even argued, they say approximately, that this text is 2,500 years before the birth of Christ, okay? So a lot of you are mentioning how there's a religious connotation to the text. It kind of reminds them of the Ten Commandments. It kind of reminds them of the Bible or what have you. Keep in mind that this was written 2,500 years before the birth of Christ, right? So this predates the Bible. So they're saying it was coming to production around the 5th dynastic period, okay? But here's what's important. Ptahhotep was concerned with what he called the Medr Nefer. So Medr is spelled the same, M-D-W, Nefer, N as in Nancy, F as in Frank, R as in Roger. The Medr Nefer, right? And what the Medr Nefer translates to is good speech, right? He wants to put these teachings, these instructions down so that way the society could have good speech, right? Now, I'm going to read a passage from the preface. Actually, no, it's from the opening. Yeah, this is from the opening paragraph. This is from page 16 towards the bottom of the page, okay? This is Ptahhotep speaking to his advisor or his superior to the pharaoh who he served under, okay? This is the pharaoh's name is Asa, So this is Ptahhotep speaking to Pharaoh Asa. I want you guys to be attentive to how many times speech or utterance or word is mentioned. Khalil, yes. The only thing, Khalil, on the spelling of the Metu Nefer, they should be separate. So the MDW, then there should be a space, NFR. If you guys seeing in the chat, I'm just responding to Khalil's question about how to spell the Metu Nefer. Okay. So again, Ptahhotep speaking to his superior, Pharaoh Asa. May your servant be authorized to use the status that old age affords to teach the hearers, again, so we have hearing, right? So as to tell them, an utterance, the words, an utterance, of those who have listened to the ways of our ancestors. I'm going to read that back one more time because there's three things that become very important. May your servant be authorized to use the status that old age affords, right? Because of my old age, I'm 110 years old, right? So there's a certain status that 110 years on this planet has given me, right? And what they say is with age comes wisdom. So he has 110 years of wisdom in between his ears, right? So I want to use this to teach the hearers so as to tell them the words of those who have listened to the ways of our ancestors. So for me, to speak and to hear has become very important, right? Because what Ptahhotep wants to do is speak to those who are willing to listen to the words of those who listen to the instructions of the ancestors, okay? For those who have listened to our ancestors and of those who have listened to the gods, right? And this is why he wants to do this. May I do this for you so that strife be banned from among our people. What does strife mean? What does strife mean? Not rhetorical, it's a real question. What does it mean to have strife in a society?
I understand it as like pain. Like,
Yep.
yeah.
Pain. Jessica put trouble. Yep. Right. So he wants to do these things so trouble, pain, arguments, beef, right, can be eliminated from the society. Okay. May I do this for you so that strife may be banned from among our people and so that the two shores may serve you. Okay. So I want to teach this idea of the Metu Nefer, of good speech, right? Because this is the way of our ancestors. This is the way of those who listen to the gods. And I want to teach this so that there could be no strife among our people. Now, think about what I believe Bianca said, and I want to say Nick said in regards to respect for others, right? And respect for good relationships, right? And I said, I'm going to come back to that. This is what I'm talking about. There's this idea of relations, which is the root word of relationship. And I think in 3 weeks, we're going to read a book or a passage from a book titled The Poetics of Relation by Edward Glissant. And he's just concerned with this idea of relation, how we interact with one another, right? How we speak to one another, how we greet one another, right? Do we do this in a fashion that promotes harmony and peace? Or do we do it in a way that promotes strife, right? This is what Ptahhotep is getting to. He's like, I realize to eliminate strife, we have to instruct people on how to talk and deal with one another. Think about our society. Think about our contemporary current society. How much strife is in our society? We beef off of politics, Democrat, Republican, right? We beef off of race. We beef off of class. We beef around healthcare, right? Everything in our society is centered around strife. They sought to create a society where there's no strife in place. And the primary way to do that is with Metu Nefer, good speech. What is this class? The African oral tradition, right? So what we just found in these pages is the radix point, the beginning of the African oral tradition, the Metu Nefer, good speech, right? Now, y'all been in my class long enough to know that I use profanity, right? Sometimes called curse words. I don't view them as curse words. but I understand the intentions behind this notion of curse words, right? You could put something on somebody through your words that will curse them, that will bring harm upon them, right? That will harm them or their family, their spirit, or their person. That's a curse word, right? That's a real curse word. Not fuck, not damn, not none, not that. But when you say things that tear people down, juxtaposed to building them up, those are the curse words that we're really talking about and dealing with, right? So they're trying to instruct us on ways to build good relations, on ways to build harmony, on ways to build order, on ways to build reciprocity, right? On ways to be prosperous. This is what the values of this society were. So when I asked you guys, what does this text say about the society that produced it, right? They value harmony. They value not having strife amongst the people, right? This is what they placed on high importance. What do we value in our society? Not rhetorical, real question. What do we value in our society?
Money, greediness.
That's it. That's it.
Power.
What else, Emily?
Power.
And you get power through money and greed, right? So it all circles back to that. And if you guys read closely, they told you what to do with that notion of greed, right? They told you how dangerous greed could be, right? Now it makes sense as to why we are in the state that we're in, with a society that is built on greed, on accumulation of wealth, on accumulation of materials, and not putting the proper responsibility or priority on the person, on the spirit, right? This is how we've gotten to where we're at. So those are my notes for the reading. That's my context for the reading. Is there any questions about my notes? Okay. So what we'll do from here is we're going to jump into our first fishbowl of the
I have
semester.
a question real quick.
My bad. Go ahead, man. Go ahead.
Okay, so on point number 13, I didn't necessarily understand it. If you could go over that for me real quick.
Yeah, I'm going to read it and then we'll unpack it. And don't just rely on me. If other people have ideas after I read it, please jump in, because this learning process is collective, right? So we're looking at passage 13. On the bottom of the page, it will be page number 22, but we're looking at passage 13, okay? If you are a guard in the storehouse, stand or sit rather than leave your post and trespass into someone else's place. So let's just stop there, right? So we know that he's situating you in somebody who's a guard, right? So just think about a security guard, just to bring it to our time. All it's saying is, as of now, if you're a security guard, motherfucker, don't leave your security guard post. If you need to sit down, that's okay. If you need to stand up, that's okay. But do not leave your post, right? Do not trespass into other people's territories, right? Follow this rule from the first. Never leave your post, even when fatigued. Keen is the face to him who enters unannounced, and suspicious is the seat of him who has been asked to come in. The storehouse has fixed rules. Okay, let's unpack what we just read. Never leave your post, even when fatigued. So we know if you're tired, stay on your post. Keen is the face to him who enters unannounced, right? So we know that keen can mean like aware, something to that effect, right? So they're saying that keen is the individual or the face who enters unannounced, right? Because if you leave your storehouse, then somebody could walk into the place that you're protecting unannounced, right? You should be the one to manage who comes in and out of what they call the storehouse, because you're on guard, right? And spacious is the seat of him who has been asked to come in, right? So if I'm guarding the storehouse and I know that I'm expecting Ryan to come, right? Because had the instruction that Ryan will be coming, his seat will be spacious because he's supposed to be there, right? And you are still doing your job because you know you've been instructed to let Ryan in. That's why his seat will be spacious. The storehouse has fixed rules, right? all behavior is strictly by the rule. So everything has its order, and everything is done by the order of this storehouse, right? Only a God can penetrate the secure warehouse where the rules are followed, right? So one, this is what I would call like a double entendre, right? Because it's saying only a God can enter the storehouse, right? So one, that kind of makes you think you have to be a beyond human to come into this storehouse, right? That's one way to look at it. But it's also saying only a God can enter the storehouse because the gods are following the rules, right? So you abiding by the rules of the storehouse allows you permission into the storehouse, right? Also, we have to take God's and not understand it from how we understand God to be now, but how they viewed gods, right? How we think about God is an entity outside of ourselves, right? The all supreme knowing, all supreme being, the creator of all things, right? How they viewed gods is once you come to a certain level of mastery as a human being, right? When you learned all your lessons, you can be elevated to God status, right? When you've done something of such great importance, you are elevated to God status, right? Think about Imhotep, right? The real father of medicine. And what they said, 2,000 years after his death, because of what he did, he was elevated to God status. And then a full 200 years after that, he was elevated to a full demagogue, right? So they look at this notion of gods a little bit differently than the way that we've been trained to understand this idea of God, okay? So another way we could read this, so it says only a God can penetrate the secure warehouse. Another way that you could read this or understand this, only a God, because of a God's understanding of the rules, can penetrate the warehouse where the rules are followed, right? Comma, even by privileged person. So even God's got to follow the rules, right? And a God's going to move with the understanding to know that I'm going to follow these rules. So there's a couple of things going on in this passage. One is instructing you, if you're on guard, stay on your guard. Tired or not, you stay on your guard, right? Another thing that's going on in this passage is the importance of rules and the importance of adhering to the order of the space that you're entering, right? No matter who you are, God or not, you must follow those rules. And implicitly is saying those who have been elevated to a God status are going to follow the rules anyway because they always do what's right. Amir, does that provide a little bit more understanding to the passage for you?
Yeah, it does.
So one thing I want to point out to you guys, if you notice, I didn't read the whole passage, right? You have to break it up in parts. Break it up in parts. Especially when you get into next week's reading, that shit's going to be a lot harder than what this week's reading was. So I'm just keep that 100 with y'all. You're going to have to really take the time, break it down piece by piece. This is where the intellectual exercise comes in, okay? Any other questions about my notes? All right, so check it. We're going to go into our first fishbowl. I don't want you guys to be nervous. I don't want you guys to kind of bug out. You'll be fine. You can literally read your journals. That's a sufficient fishbowl. You could talk about what you guys discussed in your breakout rooms. That's perfectly fine for your fishbowl. You could talk about what I just talked about in my notes. That's perfectly fine. Or whatever stood out to you in the readings, okay? So don't make it more than what it has to be. It's very simple. This course is designed for you guys to have success in the fishbowl. That's why we're doing things in the order that we do, right? That's why you guys went to breakout rooms first. That gives you something to talk about in the fishbowl. That's why I gave you my notes first, to give you something to talk about in the fishbowl. So I'm going to ask for volunteers. 1 second, let me write this down so I can keep track. 101. This is Group B. Is there any volunteers for our fishbowl? We'll do 3 people, maybe 4.
I can go first.
Okay, I got you, Khalil. So you know you have 1 out the way for the semester, and you have 1 more to do. Anybody else want to volunteer?
I'll go.
Okay, Ryan and Sean. We'll get 1 more, preferably a woman, just to kind of add some gender balance in the conversation. No volunteers, so I'm gonna call on somebody then.
I'll just go.
Okay.
I'll go.
We'll go with Bianca. Thank you, Bianca. And again, is none too difficult. You can talk about what you like, talk about what you didn't like, talk about what you didn't understand. You could literally read your journal word for word. You could regurgitate what you guys discussed in your breakout rooms, or you could talk about what I mentioned in my notes. I'm gonna put myself on mute, and whoever wants to start it off, it's on you.
Okay, cool. I found it interesting how there was a emphasis on not to serve yourself through your actions, because I like in the ninth like quote unquote commandment, was talking about how you shouldn't just act upon like you shouldn't do things just to relieve your own heart. I found that really interesting. So.
And then I like how it says, know your friends and then you'll prosper. And it says, don't be mean towards your friends.
What I was gonna ask the professor was that like, but I can ask you guys too how you guys feel about it. Cause I was like, you know, no offense to people that read the Bible or nothing, but like, this is, more strong than the Bible. Like I read, the pieces that he gave us, and I learned so much from it. Then, it'd take me a while to read from the Bible and get some good from that. So like, how do you guys think that we would benefit from following this book instead of the Bible? And would we be better today if we were to follow that, or what?
I know I'm not a volunteer or anything, but I would like to add that the difference between the Bible and the reading is that the Bible condemns you to hell if you don't do what the Ten Commandments say. And the reading is just for something greater, for something for us to follow, to have on morality, on what's good and right. And there's no, well, you're going to hell, well, this, if you don't do this, then this is going to happen. It's just more for us to have.
I had to add something if you don't mind. Also, the Bible is all about choices. It's God gives you choices. It's not like you have to do anything. It's you have this choice or that choice. It's all about having choices. So I had to add that too.
I think you're right. This reading to me just seemed like it was giving you virtues to live by, to live a good life. I think, but to add what Ryan was saying, I do think that in our society, following this would be good. They're just like basic virtues, like steps to live a good life. I liked how in 25, for example, they were talking about power and how to gain respect through your knowledge and your speech. I think it reflects the kind of society they were. It doesn't seem like they were violent, or at least based on what he was saying to the Pharaoh. It seems like they valued knowledge a lot. Yeah, I thought that was cool.
Real quick, Sean.
Yeah.
On passage 25, what kind of speech are they valuing? Because it's a specified type of speech that they're talking about.
Gentleness of speech.
Yeah, right? Gentleness of speech.
It really reflects that it didn't seem like they were a violent society.
Yep.
Valued knowledge more.
Yeah, and that to me that goes back to that netter nefer, right? That's they're talking about that gentleness, right?
Exactly.
I think Ryan posed a great question, and I kind of wanted to address that and lead that into our overall group conversation. Before I do that, though, for those who fishbowl today, how did you feel about the fishbowl process?
Simple. Just like talk about what you learned, what you know, what you're curious about.
Nothing difficult, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So for those who did not fishbowl, hopefully you feel more comfortable going into next week about the fishbowl. I'm not asking for a lot, man. It's just something to kind of kick the conversation rolling and kind of get you guys to engage. But to address Ryan's question, because I think it's a very fecund question. And I'm gonna use this word fecund. That's one of my favorite words. It just means something that can produce a lot of thought, right? Something that's fertile for thought. That's all that means. But it's important to me, and I'm going to answer your question with a question, right? Who knows what the acronym for the Bible is? First of all, if you don't know, the Bible is an acronym. If you do know that, what does the acronym mean?
Basic instructions before leaving Earth.
Basic instructions before leaving Earth, right? So if you read that and you think about what they're telling you, the Bible is situated in what you should do so you can successfully make it to heaven, right? Before you leave Earth, do these things, right? So it's really about the afterlife, okay? Going back to Keisha's comments about the choices, not to say that you're wrong, Keisha, but I'm going to look at it a little bit more nuanced, right? Because yes, it's about choices, but I would say it's more so about consequences. Because if you
I can agree with that as well.
Yeah,
I can agree with that as well.
Because if you make this choice, your ass is going to hell or you're going to heaven. It's more about the consequence, right?
Exactly.
So basic instructions before leaving Earth. I want you guys to think back to last week's lecture in the video that we watched, about that real quick 7-minute video of Asha Kwesi. And he says that the Comedics were concerned with building heaven on Earth, right? Which is why they studied the stars and why they studied the Orion's belt, and they made sure that the pyramids were in direct alignment with the stars, right? They want to build heaven on Earth. So these instructions aren't about what you should do so you can successfully navigate the afterlife or make it to heaven. It's about what you should do on Earth so that way we can have heaven here on Earth. So we can have good relationships. So we don't have to have strife within our communities, right? So to me, that's the distinction between the Bible and this text. And Emily, I believe Emily was spot on in her assessment of the difference. This is not here to condemn you. This is just here to say, yo, let's just do these things so we can all be happy. Let's just do these things so we ain't walking around killing each other and fighting over stupid shit, right? Let's just do these things so we can have heaven, not when we die, but right here, right now. And to me, I gotta agree with you, Ryan. When you're doing something not out of fear, it's gonna be more purposeful, right? And and y'all said it to start off the class. It's not about condemning you. It's not about you going to hell. It's not even none of that's even talked about here. It's just about how we treat each other, point blank, period. And to me, that just strips down all the other bullshit that religion adds on and just gets down to the essence. How do we interact with one another, right? When I see you in the street, how do I greet you? If you need something, do I be suspicious and walk away, or do I give you what you need, right? This is what's important to these people. So what are some other thoughts on the readings? This could be from anybody in the class. It does not have to be the fishbowl. The fishbowl's over. I just want to open this up to class conversation.
I think I might just replace all my family's Bibles with this.
You might get your ass whipped, Emily. Be careful with that one, though. They folks be serious about that Bible, boy. But I'm with you. Who else?
I thought it was interesting the Bible point that he made when he's like, this is like better than the Bible, just more than you could get out the Bible. I thought it was interesting. I didn't necessarily agree with y'all, and not just because like from a extremely I'm just devout Christian, you gotta do everything perfectly. But if you take away the religious aspects of the Bible and you just read the Bible just and read it as instructions and just here, take this word less as fear going to hell or fear this, fear that, and you read it as just instructions for how you live life, or you just read about Jesus and how he lived life and then try to model it and live an aspect of how he went about living his life, focused on saying words correctly. Kind of a lot of the stuff that is talked about here is stuff that's related in the Bible, if you dig a little bit deeper than just the religious stuff. Now, I personally don't necessarily know where I lean with it religiously, but like as a instruction book, kind of like how this is on how to live life and be good, I feel like they're on very much on the same level. I saw a lot of similarities personally from me reading it, but I do come from a family that's devout Christian, so they do a lot of reading the Bible, a lot of interpreting it, and then from a lot of that interpretation, I kind of got the same things while reading this, which was crazy because you started talking about how basically the Europeans stole it. Then it all started making sense because that sounded very believable. So, but I thought it had a lot of relation. There's a lot of similarities between this and the Bible, more than like one being better than the other. I think they're very much on the same level.
I think you're right. To me, this is where I would draw a distinction, and I'll use a sports reference, right? We'll take Kobe and Jordan, right? For all intents and purposes, this is Jordan because this came first, right? It says within the text 2,500 years before the protagonist of the Bible was even born, right? So while yes, Kobe and Jordan they're in the same conversation, right? As the greatest scorers in the game, right? But you have to understand that there would be no Kobe if there wasn't Jordan. Because who did Kobe watch to develop his game, right? When Kobe had the opportunity to meet Jordan, who did he start texting to figure out how to do the fadeaway jump shot, right? So the same parallel is true with this. When the Europeans came into the temples of Kemet and seeing these texts written on the walls, they wrote it down, they made their interpretation, then the Bible's unfolded, right? So if you research the same gentleman who we watched last week, Ashwa Kwesi, his whole over is about the ancient African origins of Christianity, the ancient African origins of Western civilization, right? So by and large, the Bible is the European interpretation of this. That's why there's so many similarities, right? And naturally, if you don't understand the people's language, if you don't understand the people's culture, right, there's going to be things that's missed in translation. So you'll fill in the gaps with how you understand things to be, right? So, and you'll figure out this next week, there is a concept of the afterlife in Kemetic spirituality, right? But what the Europeans did, because they couldn't understand fully the African science of the afterlife, they made up heaven and hell, right? Because that's how they understood things to be, through their rationale and through their experiences. But it doesn't interpret itself the same way in Kemet folklore. And we'll read a little bit about that next week as we get into the Ma'at readings. So I agree with you. They're in the same conversation. They're set to do the same things, right? But for me, I always look at the original. The remix is cool. I fuck with remixes, but I like that original where they got the sample from, right? Other thoughts?
Just that Kobe Jordan like analogy and way to process information. That shit was so fucking cool.
That's dope, right?
Yeah. So yeah, thank you for that. I'm gonna think about that from now on.
No worries. You gotta make it relatable. So let me ask y'all this. What did y'all pick up on the role of women in the society from reading this text?
That they're actually valued and respected.
Why do you say that, Emily? I don't think you're wrong, but why? What gave you that interpretation?
Well, in our discussion room, we were talking about how it's actually described how you can take care of a woman and how you should take care of a woman.
What do you remember? I think it's 11, right? That passage. It might be 11. I want to read that so everybody. No, it's not 11.
There was a few, but I think number 21 talks about it, and then it talks about it a few times, but I think number 21 is the one.
21. Yep, you're right. I'm gonna read that so that way everybody's on the same page. I want to talk about this because I read this initially and I had a different response, but we'll unpack it, right? So let's read it first. When you prosper, establish your home, love your wife with adore. And adoration, right, is what they mean by the adore. Then fill her belly and clothe her back. Caress her. Give her ornaments to soothe her body. Fulfill her wishes for as long as you live. She is a fertile field for her husband. Do not be brutal. Good manners will influence her better than force. Do not contend with her in the courts. Keep her from the need to resort to outside powers. Her eye is her storm when she gazes. It is by such treatment that she will be compelled to stay in your house. Okay? Now, for me, initially, when I read this, I'm like, this is kind of subjective to women, right? It's all about women's almost being the property of man. But then I was like, let me read this again, right? And it's not. It's absolutely not. It really speaks to the agency of the women. And if you read it carefully, it's telling the men, you better do this shit to not lose your wife. This is really like, it's putting you up on game. Like, don't fuck up this relationship. You better do these things, right? Because if you don't, she has the authority to go to outside powers. If she finds another man who's going to caress her back and fill her belly, you mess that up, not her, right? And then I even thought about, she's a fertile field for her husband, right? And when you hear that, what do you first think about? What do you guys think about when you heard the fertile field? What came to mind?
For me, it's like gardening, and now you have to be very careful and not like fuck it up or anything.
Okay, that's more evolved than me. Anybody else? What's the first thing that you came to your mind when you think about a woman being fertile?
Children. That's what came to mind.
Children. So for me, I'm like, yo, you're going to reduce this to just her ability to have children, right? This is my first thought. But upon further reading, I'm kind of leaning more toward Khalil, right? Just the ability to produce new things for you, right? My wife gave me a son and a daughter, right? That's her. She did that from her fertile field. But there's been so much other abundance that my wife has brought into my life outside of my children, right? Just a way for her to help me see things differently, help me get on my shit a little bit better, right? That's the fertility that she brought into my life. That's outside of her ability to have children, right? So I think this is what they're talking about more so, the fertility that women can bring to a man's life that just don't deal with just the children, right? Fellas, when you for y'all being single now, when you get your wives, you'll know you'll start eating better, right? That little fast food shit y'all always be doing, have a good home cooked meal, that's going to make you a better person, right? There's going to be things that women are going to do in your life that's going to improve the quality of your life. This is what they're talking about, right? And then for me, finally, which really situates the power of woman is her eye is her storm when she gazes. I don't know about y'all, but I don't know, especially for me, black women, when they get that gaze, you know you done fucked up, right? And you know there's a storm coming your way, right? And that, to me, speaks to the power of not only women, right? Of all women, but for me, in my experience, especially black women. It's like, so something kicks off when y'all are displeased, it gets really bad. So I have to agree with Emily, right? They really do speak to the agency, the authority, and the value women should have in a society, right? It really does. Other thoughts about the role of women in the text?
Can we go over 18?
18?
Yeah, because I was reading it and I had trouble discerning whether it was like about respecting women and respecting women in general, or it was more of like, don't try and talk to another man's girl. Like
it's the latter, but it's the latter, but you're right. So 18 on page 24. So if you want friendship to endure in the house that you enter, the house of a master, of a brother or a friend, then in whatever place you enter, beware of approaching the women there, right? So whoever house you go to, be very cautious about approaching the woman in that household, right? Unhappy is the place where this is done. So if you do approach that woman in that household, you're about to fuck up the harmony of that household, right? It will be unhappy. Unwelcome is he who intrudes on them. 1,000 men are turned away from their good because of a short moment that is like a dream. So in other words, that 15, 20, 30, 45 minutes that y'all had together doing what y'all do, that's like a dream, you're going to mess up all the good in your life for that short amount of time, right? And then that moment is followed by death. that comes from having known that dream, right? So because you engaged in that 15, 20, 30, 45 minutes of pleasure, calamity's coming because you weren't supposed to be doing that anyway, right? Anyone who encourages you to take advantage of the situation gives you poor advice. When you go to do it, your heart says no. If you are the one who fails through the lust of women, then no affairs of yours will prosper, right? I mean, that right there is a word. Like if you are, I'm going to read that one more time. If you are one who fails through the lust of women, then no affair of yours can prosper, right? So if you can't exhibit self-control on how you engage women, you will never have success because you will always be able to be brought down, not by the woman, but by your lack of self-control. Does that make sense? Does that make a little more sense for you, Khalil?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments, concerns, thoughts about the reading? Bridget, what did you think about the reading?
I thought it was really interesting, but I specifically liked what you touched on right now because I think it reminds me of the fishbowl that I did yesterday when we were talking about the cheating, and I think it goes back to like respecting your partner. So I thought that the text connected to what I was speaking about yesterday. So I really liked it.
It's a good point. Very good point. Ariel, what did you think about the reading?
I thought the reading was really interesting. I thought it sets us up for us as society to like follow set rules that would actually help us and like communicate with others without causing problems and like respecting each other.
Yeah, I agree. Let's get one more from somebody that we haven't heard from today, and we'll call it a day. I'll show you guys what the reading will be for next week. I haven't heard from Jessica. I haven't heard from Elizabeth. Haven't heard from Eric, Maxwell.
I'll talk.
Okay, go ahead, Jessica. Thank you.
I really enjoyed it, and I thought that the way that it approaches everything is really about taking care of like yourself as well as the society, and just not making choices that are gonna, in the long run, kind of ruin your own, life or those around you. A lot of it hits on respect and, just being a good leader.
Yeah.
And it's also the importance of just like listening to what people have to say and, watching how you respond to that. A lot of it was like about restraint, kind of holding back when you want to, fight. But I don't know, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point about leadership and listening, right? And how much for the comedics, right? To be a good leader is to be a good listener, right? Really, to be a good person is to be a good listener, especially towards the end of the text when he talks about, a good son is a son who listens to the words of his father, right? This notion of hearing becomes very fecund for the comedics, right? And if you think about it, how do you learn more? By speaking or by listening?
Definitely listening.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So it's really situated in a way that just makes a better society. If you are a leader, you must always do what's right and what's pure. You must be pure in your actions, right? And then if we are to tie this conversation around leadership in the previous conversation we were having around women, and I believe we said this earlier, I said this last week, just for me, when you think about it, how naturally women exhibit these leadership qualities more than men do. If you really think about it, like just from the womb, innately, women embody fundamental qualities of leadership that men just don't have, right? And which makes me think, how far back are we as a society by the fact that we haven't had a woman lead us as in this particular iteration of our society, right? So definitely. All right, we'll call it a day. I want to show you guys where to find the reading for next week. I will email this to you guys, but just in case you want to start now, I want to show you where to get this. So every course is going to be structured just like this. Check in with y'all, get a chance for you guys to vent. We'll jump into our breakout rooms. We'll come back, discuss the breakout rooms, jump into my notes, jump into the fishbowl, and we'll have course conversation. It'll go the exact same way every day, just so you kind of know what to anticipate. Give me 1 second. Let me pull up your Google Classroom site. I'll show you where to find the readings, and we'll call it quits. So you guys are 01. So under classwork, we're still in weeks 1 through 3. We just read Hilliard teaching of Ptahhotep. For next week, we're going to read Karenga part 1, part 2, and part 3. So just read these 3. Again, think of it as one reading. So you only have to do one journal entry, but please read all 3 of these because they're all together. This is extra reading if you wanted to do this. You don't have to, but you do want to make sure you read the Ma'at readings. Okay? 1, 2, 3. And we'll journal about that. And we'll discuss for next week. Before we break out, are there any other